Yeah, really joyful, really celebratory time. And as I was preparing my remarks this morning, what I might say, I thought to that time and of all the other funerals, all the other burials I've done, and I've been a priest almost 15 years, so at this a while, and done many of these things, journeyed through these times in people's life. And I'll tell you what I've never seen. Are you ready? I've never seen this. Not once have I ever seen this. A hearse pulling a U-Haul. Yeah, thanks. I'll take that. Pity laughs are good. Yeah. Not once have I seen that. Yeah. And maybe that's just my fancy way of saying we can't take it with us, can we? Try as we might. Try as we might. And I think that's what Jesus is getting at in this gospel reading this morning. There's a lot going on, a lot to unpack, more than probably we have time for. Rick told me I was supposed to preach 78 minutes. Is that right? Oh, 728. That's what it was. Yes, great. Thank you for that, Gloria. Yes. Lots going on in this. As he's telling us to build for us new purses, to make for ourselves new purses that hold perhaps a different kind of treasure, I started to think about the kinds of treasure we do hold on to and cling to. For where our treasure is, there our heart is also. I have a friend who does, hello, Denver. These are my children. Don't worry, it's okay. Hi. I have a friend who does a lot of work with stewardship. And as he likes to say, he's fond of giving the sermon on the amount. Well, that usually goes over better than that. Okay. And he's a straight shooter, my friend. His name, he's from down south, and he's got it like I am, and he's got a great Southern name. His name is Corky Carlisle. Anybody know Corky? Great Southern name there. And Corky's a straight shooter. He pulls no punches, and he says, I can tell you what you care about. I can tell you exactly what you care about. Show me your checkbook. Show me your credit card statement. I'll tell you what you care about. Like I say, he's a straight shooter, pulls no punches. Yeah. And I don't want to make this too personal because we don't know each other well yet. But I am supposed to, Rick told me I'm supposed to goad you all just a little bit. Go with Mom and Denver. They love each other, I promise. Yep. Rick told me I am supposed to press the boundaries here just a little bit. And he knows the kind of work I've done, so yeah, I think we're in good hands here. Because not only could we look at our own personal checkbook, our own personal credit card statements to know what we care about, what we value, what we hold dear, maybe even what we cling to. But I think we could also write that large and look at a church's budget and know what a church cares about, values, holds dear, maybe even clings to. That tracking with everyone? Yeah, it's there. I mean, a friend of mine was the chaplain at Duke, another friend at Duke University, and he was pretty prophetic, shall we say, but he stuck very close to the text so that afterwards, if people complained about the sermon, if he were sticking very close to the gospel text, he could say, if you don't like it, take it up with the guy who wrote it. But I think the church is in an age now where we've got to be really clear about what we value, about where in fact our hearts are, where we're spending, dare I say, spending our money, where we have our treasure. So I want to talk with you briefly. I'm going to introduce it now. I'll talk with you briefly this time, and then next time, if you're back on Labor Day, although I do know that the Episcopal Church is the only church God trusts enough to take summers off. I know that. But if you're back Labor Day, we'll talk some more about this. But I was part of a non-traditional Episcopal church in the Episcopal tradition. That was our tagline. Non-traditional Episcopal church in the Episcopal tradition. Called Southside Abbey. And Southside Abbey was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And Southside Abbey grew out of a movement called the Dinner Church movement. And so we worshiped, get this, not Sunday morning, Friday evening. Sunday morning, I'm going to let you all in on a secret. Sunday morning is actually really tough on young families. Case in point there. Friday evening, less so. And as I say, it was drew out of the dinner church movement. And so we had dinner and church. And at its best, I like to think dinner church combines the best things about church and the best things about a dinner party. Who here likes a dinner party, right? Yeah. And so essentially the way it worked was this. We would gather. We would have some time to check in, to talk with one another. And then it was almost like the penitential order from the prayer book. We would start with confession, prayers of the people. And then we would have the ministry of the word. And then we would begin the ministry of the table. We would do basically communion up through the bread, and then we would hit the pause button. And then we would bring out food. And people would eat dinner. So we would have communion of the bread, then we would have dinner, and during dinner, we had a discussion about the gospel reading for the day. And I often prepared sermon, as I always do. But what I would try to do is go and I would try to hear the various groups, these sort of intentionally diverse groups, talking about the gospel reading. And I'm going to be honest, usually I jettisoned everything I had prepared to lift up something that someone had brought from the community. So we're there, we're having this wonderful conversation, and here's where I'm going to throw you the curveball. About 2/3 of the folks at a part of Southside Abbey were experiencing homelessness. So name your demographic, and we had diversity within that demographic. Education, financial security, gender, sexuality, ethnicity. I mean, any kind of demographic you can think of. It was the most diverse community I've been blessed to be a part of. And as I say, all of my training, I often threw out the window to lift up what the Spirit was bringing through someone in that community. And as I used to like to say, I had the best teachers money couldn't buy. Because these are folks who often had to pray things like, give us this day our daily bread, and mean it in a way I've rarely had to. So we're having this wonderful discussion. And then, when this discussion had died down, I said a few things. We would pick right up with, after supper, Jesus took the cup. So we would finish our communion, and that meal was sort of bound in the sacred circle of communion. And then we'd have our post-communion prayer, blessing, sending, that kind of thing. And I got to tell you, journeying with these folks for 4 years, it recalibrated my faith, and it recalibrated for me, cradle Episcopalian, although I like to say playpen Episcopalian, because I'm not sure I had it all worked out till I was a little older there, but recalibrated for me, a cradle Episcopalian, what church could be and what was really possible. Because the other thing, in addition to serving over 5,000 meals a year and keeping all of the church year, I was on diocesan staff, so my remuneration was covered, if you like. But we were able to do all of these wonderful things at Southside Abbey on a budget of about $30,000 a year. And 10,000 of that went to EFM. Do you all know EFM up here, Education for Ministry? It's a program out of Sewanee. It's a Christian formation education program. So 10,000 of that off the top went there because we had 3 EFM small groups at Southside Abbey. So really $20,000 to serve all these meals and keep the seasons of the church here. We were in a borrowed space. As I say, I was a borrowed priest from the diocese. But it really opened my eyes to what was possible, and especially the faith that these folks had. And I'll tell you one story about that, and it's related to money, and it's quick. So I think it's a nice way to end our time together this morning. One of the fellows who was very involved with Southside Abbey, a fellow named Mark. And Mark had lived on the street for a dozen years or so. Mark was a veteran of the Vietnam War and just had a tough time when he got back. And so he'd landed on the streets. He was living under an overpass, and just a really wonderful guy. He was the kind of guy who was there early and stayed late. You know these folks? Yeah. 10% of the people do 90% of the work, right? Mark was in that 10% of the people there. Yeah. And we worked with Mark. There was no real sort of program at Southside Abbey other than worship and, of course, relationships being fostered through those conversations and that worship. But we didn't have like a get in this program and you'll get into housing. No, we tried to journey with people where they were through relationships. And we did work with Mark to get him his VA back benefits and his Social Security back benefits. And so Uncle Sam, Uncle Sugar, as my pop called him, laid on him a sizable check. And so Mark got into an apartment. And the first 2 years Mark was in his apartment, he lived in a tent in the living room. He needed that. He needed those walls. He needed that kind of boundary. But Mark, when he got this check, put it into his bank account, which we also helped him get. And the next week, he handed me a check. The largest single check I have ever received. Came from this man who, a week before, the world would say had nothing. Handed me this check. 5 figures. And I said to him, Mark, I was so worldly at that time. I said to him, Mark, I can't take this. You need this. I can't take this from you. You need it. And I made the mistake of saying, you might not know where your next meal is coming from. You need this. He put his hand on my arm. He said, Bob, I know exactly where my next meal is coming from. It's coming from the same place every meal I've ever eaten has come from. It's coming from God. And then he said, I won't forget this. He said, don't take this opportunity for me to give away from me. I want to buy dinner for all my friends every Friday night. Often when I hear the phrase Saint Mark, I think of Mark because he's embodied that sainthood for me. But Mark is one, I think we could look at Mark's checkbook and we would know exactly where Mark's heart is, where Mark's values were, what Mark held dear. And I pray that for us as a community, not just this community, St. John's in the Mountains, but the Episcopal Church writ large, that we might have our eyes opened to the possibility, the blessings God has in store for us. Weren't just for Abraham, but for us. And they are as many as the stars in the sky, or as grains of sand by the seashore. Amen.